Hell's Angels bought an abandoned house to escape their pain, but found a young woman with twins. The roar of a dozen modified Harley-Davidsons shattered the otherwise serene silence of the winding country road, a sound that had long been the anthem of their lives, a defiant declaration against the world. But today, it felt different. It was less a war cry and more a desperate escape, a thunderous attempt to outrun the ghosts that clung to them like exhaust fumes. These were the men of the Iron Vultures, a chapter of the larger, infamous Hell's Angels syndicate, or at least, what was left of them. Their faces, etched with years of sun, wind, and countless brawls, held a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. It was the deep-seated fatigue of men who had seen too much, lost too much, and were now running on fumes of a different kind. Their leader, a man known only as Hammer, rode at the front. His frame was as broad and unyielding as his nickname suggested, his beard a salt and pepper cascade, his eyes a steely blue that had witnessed unspeakable acts, both committed and endured. He gripped the handlebars, the vibrations of familiar comfort, but even that couldn't drown out the echoes in his mind. The last 6 months had been a brutal education in loss. A botched drug deal, an ambush by a rival cartel, and then the relentless, unforgiving pressure from law enforcement had decimated their ranks. Their clubhouse, once a fortress of brotherhood and debauchery, now stood empty, a shell of its former glory, seized and boarded up. Half their brothers were either dead, imprisoned, or had simply vanished into the wind, seeking anonymity over loyalty. The pain was a dull, constant throb, a phantom limb ache for a life that was rapidly fading. Hammer had felt it gnawing at his soul, a venomous whisper telling him that the game was almost up. Beside him, Ghost, a man of few words and even fewer expressions, rode with an almost spectral stillness. His lanky frame belied a coiled strength, and his eyes, perpetually shaded by the brim of his worn leather cap, seemed to miss nothing. Ghost was the strategist, the silent observer, the one who saw the traps before they sprang. He had been with Hammer since their early days, through thick and thin, and he shared Hammer's unspoken fear that their time was running out. Behind them, Rattlesnake, a younger, more volatile member, twisted the throttle, his bike spitting fire as if mirroring his own barely contained fury. Rattlesnake was all raw nerve and instinct, quick to anger, quicker to violence. He hadn't known the good old days as extensively as Hammer or Ghost, but he had witnessed the rapid decline, the brutal unraveling of their world, and it had left him bitter and restless. The rest of the small convoy, barely a dozen men, were the last vestiges of a once powerful chapter, each carrying their own burdens of grief and regret. The decision to buy an abandoned house had come out of a late-night, whiskey-soaked discussion in a dingy motel room, far from their usual haunts. It was Ghost who had found the listing, an old, sprawling estate deep in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, far from any major highway, surrounded by dense, unforgiving forest. The price had been suspiciously low, a reflection of its decades of neglect and the chilling local legends that clung to its decaying walls. Hammer, desperate for a sanctuary, a place where they could regroup, lick their wounds, and simply breathe without the constant threat of sirens or rival gangs, had bought it sight unseen. It wasn't about starting over, not yet. It was about finding a temporary haven, a forgotten corner of the world where they could hide their pain, away from the judging eyes of society and the vengeful ones of their enemies. As they finally turned off the paved road onto a barely visible dirt track, the trees closed in around them, forming a dark, verdant tunnel. The air grew cooler, heavier, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The track was overgrown, branches scraping against their bikes, testament to how long it had been since anyone had ventured this deep. After what felt like an eternity, the canopy thinned, and a clearing opened up, revealing their destination. It was a monstrosity of a house, a relic from a bygone era, standing like a forgotten sentinel against the encroaching wilderness. 3 stories tall, with a steeply pitched roof, countless windows, many of them shattered or boarded up, and a sprawling porch that sagged precariously. The paint, once a vibrant white, had long since peeled and faded, leaving behind a mottled, gray patchwork. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked its way up the walls, consuming entire sections of the brickwork, giving the impression that the forest was slowly reclaiming its own. A rusted wrought iron gate, half off its hinges, marked the entrance to what had once been a grand driveway, now just a muddy, rutted path. The silence that greeted them was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant call of an unknown bird. It was a place where secrets were kept, and time had forgotten to move on. Hammer cut his engine first, the sudden quiet almost deafening. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel, and slowly walked towards the house, his gaze sweeping over its desolate facade. It was perfect. Isolated. Forgotten. A place where they could truly disappear. "All right, boys," he rumbled, his voice rough around the edges, "this is it. Our new home. For now, anyway." The men dismounted, stretching their stiff limbs, their eyes taking in the same grim spectacle. Rattlesnake kicked at a loose stone. "Looks like a damn haunted mansion, Hammer. You sure this ain't gonna attract more trouble than it solves?" Ghost merely grunted, already moving towards the front door, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol holstered at his hip. "Trouble follows us wherever we go, Rattlesnake. At least here, we'll see it coming." The front door, a heavy oak slab, was swollen and stuck, but after a collective push from a few of the men, it groaned open with a deafening shriek of protesting wood and rusted hinges. A wave of stale, musty air, thick with the scent of decay and damp, washed over them. Inside, the darkness was almost absolute, broken only by slivers of light piercing through gaps in the boarded windows and the shattered panes. Dust motes danced in these weak beams, swirling in the air like tiny, forgotten spirits. Hammer pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the gloom. The interior was a scene of utter dereliction. Wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips, revealing layers of forgotten patterns beneath. Furniture, draped in thick white sheets, stood like ghostly figures, their forms distorted by the dust and shadows. The grand staircase, once a centerpiece, now looked precarious, its banister broken in several places, steps groaning under their own weight. "All right, boys, let's get some light in here," Hammer ordered, his voice echoing eerily in the vast space. "Ghost, Rattlesnake, with me. The rest of you, start clearing out the main living areas. Check for anything useful, but mostly, look for anything unexpected." He didn't elaborate, but the implication was clear: look for traps, squatters, anything that could compromise their new sanctuary. They moved through the house with the practiced caution of men constantly on edge. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of a curtain in a draft, sent a ripple of tension through the group. The silence inside was even more oppressive than outside, broken only by their heavy footsteps and the occasional curse as someone stumbled in the dark. The house felt cold, not just from the lack of heat, but with an almost palpable chill that seemed to seep into their bones. For the first few days, their routine was simple: secure the perimeter, clear out the most accessible rooms, and establish a rudimentary living space. They boarded up more windows, reinforced the doors, and set up a generator for electricity. The main living room, with its massive stone fireplace, became their communal area. They dragged in old, dusty mattresses from various bedrooms, throwing them together to create a makeshift camp. The kitchen was a disaster, but they managed to get a small propane stove working outside for cooking. One evening, as the sun dipped below the distant tree line, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep purple, Hammer sat by the crackling fire they had built in the living room fireplace. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the peeling walls, making the old house seem alive, albeit in a sinister way. Ghost was meticulously cleaning his custom-made revolver, his movements precise and economical. Rattlesnake was sharpening a hunting knife, his face grim. The conversation was sparse, punctuated by the sounds of the house settling, groaning in the wind. Suddenly, a faint sound, barely discernible above the crackle of the fire, reached Hammer's ears. He froze, his head cocked, listening intently. It was a soft, almost imperceptible thump, followed by a faint, almost musical clink. He glanced at Ghost, who had also paused, his eyes narrowed, his head tilted. Rattlesnake, oblivious, continued to scrape his knife. "You hear that?" Hammer murmured, his voice low, a warning in its tone. Ghost nodded slowly, not looking up from his gun. "Faint. North wing, second floor." The north wing was the least explored part of the house. It was darker, more dilapidated, and one of the staircases leading to it had completely collapsed. They had deemed it too unstable for immediate exploration, focusing instead on securing the more structurally sound sections. Rattlesnake finally looked up, his eyes darting between them. "Hear what? Just the damn house falling apart, ain't it?" "No," Hammer said, his gaze fixed on the shadowy archway leading to the north wing. "That wasn't the house settling. That was something else." The three men remained silent for a long moment, listening. The wind howled softly outside, rustling through the broken windows, making the shadows dance. Then, another sound, even fainter this time, a soft, almost rhythmic creak. It sounded like a floorboard, flexing under weight. "Someone's here," Ghost stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying an undeniable weight. He slowly reassembled his revolver, the metallic clicks echoing in the sudden tension. Rattlesnake's hand went to his own weapon, a wicked-looking sawed-off shotgun. "Squatters? I'll send them packing to hell." His eyes gleamed with a familiar, dangerous light. He relished confrontation, a stark contrast to Hammer's weary resignation. "Hold on," Hammer cautioned, raising a hand. "Let's not go in there like a bull in a china shop. If someone's been living here, they know this place better than we do. Could be armed. Could be dangerous." He stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow. "Ghost, you take point. Rattlesnake, cover our backs. We go silent." They moved with practiced stealth, their heavy boots surprisingly quiet on the dusty floorboards. The air grew colder as they approached the north wing. The collapsed staircase made their ascent more difficult. They had to use a rickety service staircase at the back of the house, which groaned under their combined weight with every step. The second floor was even darker than the first, the windows completely boarded up, creating an almost tomb-like atmosphere. The silence here was absolute, thick and heavy, pressing down on them. Ghost, his flashlight beam sweeping ahead, moved like a phantom, his senses attuned to every nuance of the environment. He checked each door, each shadow, his hand never straying far from his pistol. Hammer followed, his shotgun held ready, his eyes scanning for any movement. Rattlesnake brought up the rear, his sawed-off shotgun glinting dully in the dim light, his breathing shallow. They passed several empty, decaying rooms, their contents long since rotted or plundered. Dust lay undisturbed in thick layers, cobwebs hung like shrouds, and the air was heavy with the smell of mold and decay. There was no sign that anyone had been in these rooms for decades. The sounds they had heard earlier now seemed like a distant memory, almost a trick of the mind. Then, Ghost stopped abruptly, raising a clenched fist. Hammer and Rattlesnake froze behind him. Ghost pointed his flashlight beam downwards, at the floor. In the thick layer of dust, barely visible, were faint, small footprints. They weren't the heavy, boot-clad prints of an adult man. These were lighter, smaller, almost childlike. And beside them, barely perceptible, was a faint impression of a bare foot, smaller still. Hammer's brow furrowed. "Children," he whispered, the word sounding alien in the desolate house. Ghost shook his head, his face grim. He followed the faint trail, which led them down a narrow, almost hidden hallway, one they hadn't noticed during their initial sweep. The hallway was darker than the rest, choked with cobwebs, and at its end, a door, unlike the others, appeared to be slightly ajar. A sliver of light, a soft, warm glow, emanated from beneath the door. And then, undeniably, a faint, rhythmic sound. It was a soft, almost musical hum, a lullaby, barely audible, followed by a gentle, rhythmic creaking. The sound of someone rocking. Hammer felt a strange knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't a rival gang. This wasn't a squatter looking for shelter. This was something entirely different, something utterly unexpected. He exchanged a glance with Ghost, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Rattlesnake, sensing the shift in mood, lowered his shotgun slightly, his belligerence replaced by a wary curiosity. Ghost slowly, meticulously, pushed the door open further, just enough to peer inside. The room beyond was small, but remarkably clean compared to the rest of the house. A single, flickering candle provided the only light, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, a young woman sat on a makeshift bed of old blankets and salvaged pillows, gently rocking back and forth. In her arms, cradled close, were two tiny bundles. Two infants, their small forms barely visible in the dim light. The lullaby, a soft, melodic hum, was coming from her. The woman, her face pale and drawn, her hair a tangled mess, looked up as the door creaked open. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and desperation, met Ghost's. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared, her grip tightening on the bundles in her arms, like a cornered animal protecting its young. Hammer, peering over Ghost's shoulder, saw the scene unfold. His hardened gaze softened, just a fraction, as he took in the sight of the vulnerable woman and the two tiny lives she held so fiercely. The roaring engines, the pain, the blood, the endless flight, all of it seemed to fade into the background, replaced by an unsettling, profound silence. The Hell's Angels had bought an abandoned house to escape their pain, but they had found something far more complex, far more fragile, and utterly, irrevocably unexpected. The flickering candle flame cast long, dancing shadows on the peeling walls, making the small room feel both intimate and intensely suffocating. Hammer stood framed in the doorway, his massive figure momentarily blocking the dim light from the hallway, his shotgun still held loosely in his hands. Ghost, ever the observer, remained a silent sentinel beside him, his gaze sharp and unwavering on the young woman. Rattlesnake, a coiled spring of aggression, hovered behind them, his sawed-off shotgun now lowered, but his eyes still glinting with suspicion. The woman didn't move, her pale face a mask of terror, her wide eyes fixed on Ghost, then Hammer. Her hands, surprisingly small and delicate, tightened around the two bundles in her arms, pressing them protectively against her chest. The soft lullaby had ceased, replaced by the profound, heavy silence of the old house. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with fear, and with the sudden, jarring reality of their discovery. "Who are you?" Hammer's voice was a low rumble, surprisingly gentle, though it still seemed to echo too loudly in the small space. He took a hesitant step into the room, his eyes sweeping over the makeshift bed, the few meager possessions, and finally settling on the infants. Two tiny faces, barely visible, stirred faintly in their blankets, letting out soft, almost imperceptible whimpers. The woman flinched, her breath catching in her throat. She swallowed hard, her gaze darting from Hammer to the door, as if contemplating an impossible escape. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible, "don't hurt us." Rattlesnake scoffed from behind them. "Hurt you? Lady, we just found you squatting in our house, with two brats. What do you think we're gonna do, bake you a cake?" "Shut up, Rattlesnake," Hammer growled, without looking away from the woman. His eyes held a mixture of weariness and a strange, nascent curiosity. This wasn't the kind of trouble he was used to, and that, in itself, was unsettling. "We're not going to hurt you. We just need to know who you are and what you're doing here." Ghost finally spoke, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion. "How long have you been here?" The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering towards Ghost, then back to Hammer. She seemed to be weighing her options, assessing the threat. "A few weeks," she finally managed, her voice gaining a fraction of its strength. "Maybe a month. I lost track." She shifted slightly, trying to pull the blankets higher around the babies, as if to shield them from the harsh reality of the intruders. "A month?" Rattlesnake exclaimed, pushing past Ghost to get a better look, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You've been here a month? How the hell did we not know?" "The north wing," Ghost interjected, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the small, boarded-up window, the hidden nature of the hallway. "It's isolated. The collapsed staircase. She found a way to be unseen." Hammer nodded slowly. "And the babies? Are they yours?" The question felt clumsy, out of place in his mouth. A fierce, protective glint entered the woman's eyes. "Yes. They're mine. My twins." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. "And where's their father?" Rattlesnake pressed, his tone laced with suspicion. "You're not just some runaway looking for a free ride, are you?" The woman's face tightened, a flash of something akin to defiance replacing her fear. "He's gone. He left. I had nowhere else to go." This house, it was empty. I thought. Her voice trailed off, her gaze dropping to the sleeping infants. I thought no one would ever find us here. Hammer felt a strange pang in his chest. Nowhere else to go, it resonated with their own desperate flight. He lowered his shotgun completely, resting the butt on the floor. What's your name? Sarah, she whispered, her eyes still wary, but a hint of something else, perhaps a flicker of hope, began to emerge. My name is Sarah. All right, Sarah, Hammer said, his voice softening further, though still rough. Look, we didn't expect to find anyone here. We bought this place. We're staying here. The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Sarah's eyes widened again, her terror returning. No. Please. I can go. Just let me gather my things. I'll leave. I promise. Just don't make us go out there now. Not with them. She gestured frantically to the babies, her voice cracking with desperation. Go where, Sarah? Ghost asked, his practical nature cutting through the emotional tension. It's a long way to anywhere from here. And you have 2 newborns. Rattlesnake threw his hands up in exasperation. Who cares where she goes? She's a liability, Hammer. A witness. A damn burden. We came here to disappear, not to run a damn nursery. She knows nothing about us, Rattlesnake, Hammer countered, his gaze firm on the younger man. And she's got nowhere to go. We're not just throwing a woman and 2 babies out into the wilderness. Since when do we care about that, Hammer? Rattlesnake spat, his anger boiling over. We're Iron Vultures, not some charity organization. She's a loose end. Loose ends get tied up. Permanently. He made a crude gesture with his hand, a chilling implication. Sarah gasped, clutching her babies tighter, tears welling in her eyes. No. Please. I won't tell anyone. I swear. I just need a safe place for my children. Hammer glared at Rattlesnake, a silent warning passing between them. That's enough, Rattlesnake. Nobody's getting tied up. Not today. He turned back to Sarah, his expression unreadable. Look, Sarah. We need to talk. Properly. But first, are they okay? The babies, I mean. Do they need anything? He gestured vaguely around the sparse room. There was no crib, no real baby supplies, just a few worn blankets. Sarah looked down at her infants, a profound sadness etched on her face. They're hungry. Always hungry. And I don't have much left. Just a little formula. And I'm so tired. I haven't slept properly in weeks. Her voice was a fragile whisper, cracking under the weight of her exhaustion and fear. Hammer exchanged a look with Ghost. Ghost's face remained impassive, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the impossible situation. This wasn't just a squatter. This was a crisis, and it was now their crisis. All right, Hammer said, making a decision that went against every instinct of self-preservation he'd honed over decades. We're not kicking you out. Not yet. Ghost, go get some of the guys. Bring some food, water. Anything we have that's clean. And a lamp. Get a fire going in the main living room. We'll bring Sarah and the babies down there. Rattlesnake scoffed again, but a sharp look from Hammer silenced him. Ghost, without a word, turned and moved silently out of the room. As Ghost left, the silence descended once more, punctuated only by the soft whimpers of the babies. Hammer remained in the doorway, his presence filling the small room. He felt a strange mix of annoyance, responsibility, and a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of being completely out of his depth. Their escape had led them not to solitude, but to an unexpected intersection of vulnerability and desperation. The other vultures were less than thrilled by the discovery. When Ghost returned with a few men, their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and outright anger. A woman? With twins, growled a burly biker named Reaper, his hand instinctively going to the knife on his belt. Hammer, what the hell is this? We bought this place to hide, not to adopt a family. Lower your voice, Reaper, Hammer commanded, his authority brooking no argument. She's not a threat. She's just, here. He watched as Sarah, with immense effort, rose from her makeshift bed, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear, her grip on the babies unwavering. Getting Sarah and the twins downstairs was a slow, agonizing process. The rickety service staircase groaned under their weight, and Sarah, weak from lack of food and sleep, struggled with every step. Hammer, despite his initial gruffness, found himself moving to assist, his large hand hovering near her back, ready to steady her. Rattlesnake watched the entire scene with an expression of venomous disapproval, convinced this was a catastrophic mistake. Once in the main living room, the flickering fire provided a welcome warmth and light. The other vultures, a dozen hardened men, stood awkwardly around, their usual swagger replaced by a strange unease. They were used to violence, to confrontation, to the harsh realities of their world. This fragile woman and her helpless infants were an anomaly, a wrench thrown into the gears of their carefully constructed sanctuary. Sarah sat on one of the dusty mattresses, huddled close to the fire, the twins still clutched tightly in her arms. Reaper, surprisingly, brought her a bottle of water and a piece of dried jerky, which she eyed with suspicion before taking a small, tentative bite. The babies, sensing the warmth and perhaps the presence of food, began to fuss more insistently. "They need to be fed," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I only have a little formula left. And no warm water." Hammer looked at Ghost. "See what we have. Anyone got a small pot? We need to boil some water." Ghost nodded and dispatched a couple of men to the rudimentary outdoor cooking area. The vultures, who usually only concerned themselves with whiskey and their next score, were now scrambling to find baby supplies. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on Hammer. Later that night, as the twins were finally fed and had drifted off to sleep in Sarah's arms, the vultures held a tense, whispered council. Sarah, exhausted, had also fallen into a fitful sleep, her head resting against the rough stone of the fireplace, the babies nestled safely against her. "We can't keep her, Hammer," Rattlesnake insisted, his voice low but firm, echoing the sentiments of many of the men. "She's a security risk. What if someone's looking for her? What if she talks? We're trying to lay low." "This ain't laying low, this is putting up a damn billboard saying, 'Hell's Angels operating a daycare.'" "She knows nothing about us," Hammer reiterated, running a hand through his beard. "And she's not going anywhere with those babies. Not in her condition. Not out there." He gestured vaguely towards the dark, unforgiving wilderness outside. "So what's the plan, boss?" asked another biker, Snake Eyes, his face grim. "We become her guardians. We start buying baby food and diapers. We got enough problems without adding a family to the mix." Ghost, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. "She's a variable. An uncontrolled element. But she's also weak. Vulnerable. If we get her supplies, she'll be dependent on us. That gives us leverage. And she has nowhere to go. She'll be less likely to betray us if her children's safety depends on our protection." "Protection?" Rattlesnake sneered. "From what? Her deadbeat baby daddy? Or from us?" "From anything," Ghost replied, his eyes cold and steady. "The mountains are unforgiving. And if she was running from someone, they might still be looking. Her presence here, isolated, could draw unwanted attention to the house, yes. But if she is truly alone, and truly desperate, she might be more of an asset than a liability. A decoy, perhaps. Or simply a moral obligation that, if ignored, could cause rifts within our own ranks." Hammer considered Ghost's words. The idea of a moral obligation was a foreign concept to most of the vultures, but there was a twisted logic to Ghost's pragmatic assessment. Abandoning her would be messy. It would leave a bad taste in some mouths, even among the most hardened. And it wouldn't truly solve their problem of being discovered, only shift the blame. "We need to know her full story," Hammer stated, his gaze fixed on Sarah's sleeping form. "Why she's truly here. Who she's running from. If anyone's looking for her. And we need supplies. Lots of them. For the babies. That means someone has to go to town. And that means risk. A heavy silence fell over the group. Going to town, making purchases for a woman and 2 infants, was an unprecedented risk. It was a direct contradiction to their entire strategy of disappearing. It would draw attention, raise questions. It was a beacon in the darkness they were trying to hide in. "I'll go," Rattlesnake volunteered, surprising everyone. His eyes, however, held a dangerous glint. "But if I go, Hammer, then we do this my way. We get what she needs, and then she's gone. One way or another. This ain't a permanent arrangement." Hammer looked at Rattlesnake, seeing the barely contained menace in his eyes. He knew Rattlesnake was capable of anything. But he also knew that without essential supplies, Sarah and the twins wouldn't last. And he couldn't bring himself to let that happen, not under his roof. "All right, Rattlesnake," Hammer said, his voice grave. "You go. But you bring her back what she needs. And you don't lay a hand on her or the children. Is that understood?" Rattlesnake held Hammer's gaze for a long moment, a silent battle of wills passing between them. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Understood, boss. But don't think this changes anything. She's still a problem. And problems eventually need to be solved." The next morning, under a gray, overcast sky, Rattlesnake rode out alone on his custom Harley-Davidson, the roar of its engine shattering the fragile peace of the mountains once more. He carried a list, scribbled hastily by Hammer, of baby formula, diapers, baby wipes, and basic food items for Sarah. He also carried a heavy burden of resentment and a dangerous resolve. Back at the house, a different kind of tension settled in. Sarah, now awake, looked at Hammer with a mixture of fear and a fragile, burgeoning hope. She didn't know the full extent of the discussion that had taken place, but she sensed the precariousness of her situation. Hammer, for his part, found himself strangely drawn to the quiet resilience of the young woman. He was a man who had built his life on brute force and intimidation, yet here he was, confronted by a vulnerability that seemed to disarm him in ways no enemy ever could. The rest of the vultures grumbled, but they followed Hammer's orders, albeit reluctantly. They started clearing out more rooms, making the house marginally more habitable. They even found an old, broken crib in one of the dilapidated bedrooms, which a couple of the men, surprisingly, began to tinker with, trying to make it usable. As the day wore on, the wait for Rattlesnake became an oppressive presence. Every distant sound, every rustle of leaves, sent a ripple of anxiety through the house. Hammer knew the risks. Rattlesnake was volatile, and a trip into an unfamiliar town, especially with their faces now potentially recognized by law enforcement, was a gamble. But it was a gamble they had been forced to take. Suddenly, a faint sound reached them from outside. The distinct, growing roar of a Harley-Davidson engine. It wasn't just one. It sounded like multiple bikes. Too many for just Rattlesnake. Hammer, Ghost, and the other vultures exchanged grim glances. "Get ready," Hammer rumbled, his hand instinctively going to his shotgun. All thoughts of Sarah and the babies momentarily vanished, replaced by the ingrained instinct of survival. The sanctuary they had sought, the temporary haven, was about to be tested. The outside world, or perhaps something far more sinister, had finally caught up. And Sarah and her twins were now caught in the crossfire, their presence an unforeseen complication in a war that was rapidly closing in. Hammer's hand tightened on his shotgun, the ingrained instinct of survival eclipsing all other thoughts. Ghost, ever stoic, drew his custom revolver, the metallic click a stark punctuation mark in the sudden silence. Rattlesnake, his face a mask of grim anticipation, hefted his sawed-off, its dull gleam reflecting the flickering firelight. The other vultures, a dozen hardened men, moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing their weapons, their eyes scanning the windows, the heavy oak door. The house, their temporary sanctuary, was about to become a battlefield. The roar grew louder, a cacophony of engines that spoke not of a single bike, but of a small army. Then, through the broken windows, a flicker of headlights cut through the encroaching dusk, illuminating the overgrown driveway. It wasn't just Harleys. There were a few utilitarian pickups, their beds likely laden with men and weapons. This wasn't law enforcement. This was something far more personal, far more dangerous. Cartel, Ghost stated, his voice flat, but the word hung heavy in the air, a death knell. They found us. A collective groan went through the vultures. The very ghosts they had fled had finally caught up. The botched drug deal, the ambush, the decimation of their ranks, it was all coming back to haunt them, here, in this forgotten corner of the world. Sarah, jolted awake by the sudden commotion, sat upright, clutching her twins tighter, her eyes wide with renewed terror. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Hammer spared her a quick, grim glance. "Stay low, Sarah. Don't make a sound. Hide the babies. Under the mattress, under anything." Before he could elaborate, the first shots rang out, shattering the silence with brutal finality. Glass exploded from a distant window, followed by a chorus of shouts and the heavy thud of boots on the porch. The siege had begun. "Front door!" Hammer roared, pointing his shotgun towards the entrance, already splintering under heavy impacts. "Ghost, with me. Rattlesnake, take the windows on the west side. Reaper, Snake Eyes, cover the east." The vultures moved, a well-oiled machine forged in countless street brawls and desperate shootouts. But this was different. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on fumes. And now, they had Sarah and her twins to protect, a vulnerability that twisted Hammer's gut. Just as the front door began to give way, a familiar roar, distinct from the others, echoed from the back of the house. Rattlesnake's Harley. He had made it back. A moment later, a figure burst through the back door, staggering into the living room, mud-splattered and wild-eyed. It was Rattlesnake, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, a sawed-off shotgun in his hand. "They were waiting for me," he gasped, his chest heaving. "They ambushed me on the dirt track. I lost the bike, but I got the bag." He threw the duffel bag at Hammer's feet. It was heavy, unmistakably filled with baby supplies. His eyes, however, weren't on the cartel. They were on Sarah, huddled in the corner. "Hammer, she's a liability. We need to get her out. No time." Hammer yelled, firing a blast from his shotgun as the front door finally splintered open, revealing two masked figures, their weapons spitting fire. Ghost was a blur of motion beside him, his revolver barking, dropping one of the intruders with surgical precision. The house became a maelstrom of gunfire, shouts, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The cartel, a relentless wave of vengeance, poured in, their goal clear: eliminate the iron vultures. The vultures, however, fought with a savage desperation they hadn't known they possessed. This wasn't just about their lives anymore, it was about the fragile flicker of humanity that Sarah and her twins represented. Hammer, a force of nature, moved through the chaos, his shotgun a deadly extension of his will. He saw Reaper go down, a bullet to the chest, his eyes wide with a final, surprised realization. Snake Eyes was holding his own, but the numbers were overwhelming. "Ghost! Sarah! Upstairs! North wing!" Hammer bellowed over the din, through the secret passage. "Take the babies! Go!" Ghost, understanding the desperate gamble, grabbed Sarah's arm. "Come on! Now!" Sarah, her face streaked with tears, hesitated for a split second, then scrambled to her feet, clutching her babies, following Ghost towards the hidden hallway. Rattlesnake, seeing them move, fired a furious volley at the advancing cartel, buying them precious seconds. "I'll cover them!" Rattlesnake screamed, his eyes burning with a manic fury. "Get her out, Hammer!" Hammer nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the younger man's surprising sacrifice. He knew Rattlesnake had always been a loose cannon, but in this moment, he was a brother, a shield. Hammer turned, joining the desperate defense, laying down covering fire as Ghost and Sarah vanished up the rickety service staircase. The north wing, once a symbol of their neglect, now became their only hope. Ghost, familiar with the layout, led Sarah through the darkened, cobweb-choked hallway. The secret passage, a cleverly disguised door behind a built-in bookshelf, led to a small, hidden room, barely large enough for the three of them. It was a space designed for hiding, a relic from a time of prohibition or runaway slaves, and it was their last resort. "Stay here," Ghost commanded, his voice urgent but steady. "Don't make a sound. Don't come out for anything." He looked at the twins, then back at Sarah, a flicker of something akin to concern in his usually impassive eyes. "You're safe here. For now." He slipped out, closing the hidden door behind him, leaving Sarah in absolute darkness, the muffled sounds of the battle raging below. Ghost rejoined the fight downstairs, his presence a grim addition to the vultures' dwindling numbers. They were pushed back, room by room, into the main living area. The cartel, led by a ruthless enforcer known as El Lobo, the Wolf, was determined to leave no one alive. El Lobo, a lean, scarred man with eyes like obsidian, had a personal vendetta against the vultures, especially Hammer, for the botched drug deal that had cost his cartel millions. Hammer fought like a cornered beast, a lifetime of violence culminating in this desperate stand. He saw the faces of his fallen brothers, the pain of their loss fueling his rage. But beneath the rage, a new resolve had taken root. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting to buy time, to ensure that Sarah and her children had a chance. Rattlesnake, true to his word, fought like a demon, his sawed-off shotgun a symphony of destruction. He took down 3 cartel members before a bullet caught him in the leg. He roared in pain, but kept firing, dragging himself behind a overturned table. "Go, Hammer! Get out! I'll hold them," he yelled, his voice raw. Hammer looked at his brother, knowing this was a final farewell. He nodded, a silent promise, then turned and began to retreat, laying down suppressive fire as he went. His plan was forming: create a diversion, draw them away, and then find a way for Sarah to escape. He retreated into the kitchen, a scene of utter destruction, then out the back door, drawing a hail of gunfire as he sprinted into the dense forest. The cartel, bloodthirsty and eager for their prize, followed, leaving a smaller contingent to clear the rest of the house. El Lobo, however, was not so easily fooled. He had seen Ghost slip away towards the north wing. Search the upper floors. Find the woman and the children. Hammer wouldn't risk his life for nothing, he barked, his voice cold and menacing. Upstairs, Sarah huddled in the suffocating darkness of the secret room, the cries of her infants a terrifying counterpoint to the distant gunfire. She heard footsteps, voices, growing louder, closer. They were searching. She pressed her hands over the babies' mouths, her heart pounding against her ribs, praying they wouldn't cry out. Suddenly, the hidden door groaned. Someone was trying to open it. Panic seized her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But the door didn't open. The sound faded, then returned, accompanied by frustrated curses. They hadn't found the mechanism. They were just pushing against it, unknowingly. Meanwhile, Hammer, using his intimate knowledge of the surrounding wilderness, led El Lobo and his main force on a wild chase through the unforgiving Appalachian foothills. He was wounded, bleeding, but he pushed on, drawing them deeper, buying precious time. He knew this forest, its hidden trails, its treacherous ravines. He was a ghost in the trees, leading them to their doom, or his own. Back at the house, Ghost, having returned downstairs after securing Sarah, found Rattlesnake bleeding heavily. "They're coming for the north wing," Ghost said, his voice grim. El Lobo knows. Rattlesnake looked up, his face pale. "Damn it. She's got nowhere to go." He gritted his teeth, grabbing a discarded rifle. "Then we make sure they don't get through." The remaining vultures, a motley crew of 3 besides Ghost and Rattlesnake, made their final stand at the base of the rickety service staircase leading to the north wing. They were out of ammo, out of strength, but not out of defiance. They fought viciously, buying more time, sacrificing themselves one by one. Ghost, seeing the inevitable, pulled Rattlesnake to his feet. "We're done here. They'll overwhelm us. But we can still protect her." He pointed to a small, barely noticeable window in the back of the house, overlooking a steep, overgrown slope. "There's a way out. A steep incline, but it leads to the creek. If she can make it there, she can follow it downstream. Rattlesnake, leaning heavily on Ghost, nodded, a strange mix of pain and understanding in his eyes. Hammer's out there. He's bought us this chance. They fought their way to the hidden room, Ghost forcing the disguise door open. Sarah, her face tear-streaked but resolute, looked up, her babies whimpering softly. "We're getting you out," Ghost said, his voice clipped. "There's a window. It's a steep drop, but doable. Rattlesnake will go first. He'll help break your fall." Rattlesnake, despite his wound, managed a grim smile. "Looks like I'm still doing daycare, huh?" He climbed onto the windowsill, his injured leg protesting, then dropped out of sight, grunting as he hit the ground below. "All right, Sarah. Hand them down. One at a time." Sarah, with a mother's fierce strength, carefully lowered one twin to Rattlesnake, then the other. Ghost then helped her climb out, her body trembling with fear and exhaustion, but driven by an primal need to protect her children. As Sarah, Rattlesnake, and the twins disappeared into the dense undergrowth, Ghost turned back. He knew he couldn't follow. He had to buy them more time. He saw El Lobo and his men storming the staircase, their eyes burning with triumph. Ghost waited, his revolver in hand, a silent, spectral guardian. He fired his last 3 rounds, taking down 2 more cartel members, before he was overwhelmed in a brutal, silent struggle. His sacrifice ensured Sarah's escape. Hours later, as dawn painted the sky in hues of soft gray and rose, the sounds of battle had faded. The old house stood, a smoking ruin, a testament to the brutal conflict it had witnessed. El Lobo, victorious but frustrated, stood amidst the rubble, his men searching for Hammer. But Hammer was gone. He had led the cartel on a relentless chase, an exhausting, bloody cat-and-mouse game through the mountains, exacting a heavy toll on their numbers. Finally, he had slipped away, vanishing into the pre-dawn mist, a phantom escaping his own pain, but now carrying a new, unexpected purpose. He would never forget the image of Sarah and her twins, those fragile lives, those innocent eyes. Days turned into weeks. Sarah, guided by instinct and the faint sound of a distant river, had followed the creek downstream, eventually reaching a small, isolated town. Exhausted, malnourished, but alive, she found help. She told a story of being lost in the wilderness, of a deserted house, carefully omitting any mention of the bikers, a silent promise to the men who had, against all odds, saved her and her children. The small duffel bag, filled with baby supplies, was a strange, tangible proof of an impossible truth. She eventually made her way to a distant city, far from the mountains, far from the shadows of the cartel. She started a new life, working odd jobs, raising her twins. The memory of the iron vultures, of Hammer, Ghost, and even the gruff Rattlesnake, remained a secret, a strange, dark guardian angel in her past. Hammer, a solitary figure, continued to roam. His escape from pain had transformed into a nomadic existence, a self-imposed exile. He was no longer the leader of the iron vultures, they were gone, decimated, their brotherhood shattered. But he wasn't just running anymore. He was watching. From a distance, he occasionally sent anonymous funds to a small bank account in a distant city, an account he had somehow gleaned was Sarah's. It was a silent, unsentimental act of protection, a continuation of the strange, unexpected responsibility he had found in that abandoned house. Rattlesnake, against all odds, survived. Wounded and bitter, he eventually found his way out of the mountains. He never rejoined any gang. The experience had changed him, not into a saint, but into a man who understood the cost of violence, and the unexpected burden of caring. He became a drifter, a shadow, but occasionally, in a dingy bar or a forgotten diner, he would hear a distant lullaby, and a ghost of a memory would stir, a flicker of humanity in his hardened heart. The abandoned house, now a charred ruin, slowly began to be reclaimed by the forest. It stood as a silent monument, not just to the Hell's Angels who had sought to escape their pain within its walls, but to the young woman and her twins who had inadvertently offered them a glimpse of redemption, a profound, unexpected purpose in a world consumed by darkness. The roar of engines had faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of a past that refused to be forgotten, and the quiet promise of a future, however uncertain, that had been salvaged from the brink of despair. Hammer, the last of the iron vultures, continued his lonely ride, no longer outrunning ghosts, but carrying a silent, precious memory, a flicker of light in the unending dark. He had found not an escape from pain, but a reason to endure it.